recording is going. And I want to thank you guys again for coming out and hanging out with me in another session. It won't be a marathon like last week. So I am glad to see you guys back here again. Good to see I got Sarah there. Sarah, do you know why your name really um, perks me up? Do you know the reason why that is? Yep, that was my mother's name, the person that I talked about last week that was taken away from me prematurely. But yes, so every time I run across Sarah's, I always, um, you know, pause a little bit. So thank you so much, yeah, for remembering that. And then peer leader, it's always good to have. I was telling somebody about it the other day. They say, I never had a peer leader in my class, at least not to my knowledge. I said, well, I got one, and I'm not sharing her. So, oh God. So anyway, welcome again. That's okay. Don't worry about it. You can stay peer leader. That's all right. In the grade book, you're not peer leader though. So, so because they would say, "Who's peer leader that graduated? Put it on your diploma and get your bachelor's of arts in criminal justice is awarded to peer leader." So, all righty. Okay. Yeah, yeah, I know. That's why I'm laughing about that. Will the real be like to tell the truth, right? Um, yes. Yes, Sarah, go ahead. What's your question?
I'm gonna turn on my audio for this. Hello.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, so I work overnights, and I usually have to leave about 9:30. Um, is class ever possibly gonna run over the 9:30 mark?
I hope not. I hope not. It usually doesn't, not after the initial week, not in this course. In another course I teach, it does because of the videos that are involved, but generally not. Mm-mm. No, you should be okay.
Okay, because if you notice I suddenly have to disappear, it might just mean because I'm running off.
No, it's okay. That's all right. I take it personally, so that's okay. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, no, no. Listen, I always tell all of my students that if it goes longer than an hour, um, you still can just go back and just listen to the recording. Of course, you won't have as much to you have to listen to, but I try not to. And trust me, this week I probably won't go that long because of this shoulder. So no, but no, that's good. If you do have to dart out, I know students do have to dart out because things happen. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't stay up all night saying, "Oh man, I got points against me." No, no, no. You're okay.
Okay, yeah, because otherwise I would have been like, oh, was the minute I got to work, I would have been like, all right, come on, log on.
No, no, no. You have to, yeah, and you have to go to work too. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
start work at 10 o'clock, so
Um, yeah, you got to get you one of those apps. Put the apps on your phone. I don't know if you know about that. I talked about that last week. I
the
think
rest.
I think you can get a WebEx app on your phone. You got Apple? I bet you got an Apple phone, right?
Oh no, I'm a Samsung girl.
Okay, all right. What do you got? Note 10?
No, just the Galaxy Tab.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a cousin. Okay. All right.
Hmm.
Well, yeah. But the answer is you can get in the Play Store. You should be able to get in the Play Store the WebEx um, app. Both Apple and um, Android should be able to get it. And I had a couple students who had it on their phones, and they put it in their phones and on their tablets. So I've actually just getting before I get started here, I actually had occasions where I've had to be mobile, and I have my uh, phone app, and I've used it in the car. Of course, I wasn't looking at this what was going on while driving, but I was listening to the session and able to participate in, because I put it in my system in the car, so I can hear it. And so you can, yep. Yeah, yeah, it is. See that? See, your peer leader says she has it on her phone and iPad. So yeah, download it. It'll be a way for you to keep going. So yep. So I should mention that more to my students. But yep, I think, see, these guys that are the in the peer leaders, that are in the um, student tutor mentoring group, they get all the good information first. So anyway, but yeah, so yeah, go ahead and do that, and then you'll have it then. Okay. All right. I see you put your close your mic off. Okay, so let's get started. We're here today. I guess students come in, they says, okay, did I miss the class or what? No. Again, welcome to week 2 of Realities of Criminal Justice. And I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to begin by talking about what we have to do for this week before we get into the lecture. So let me share my screen, and there it is. And you can see the information that I'm not going to go over again. I went over all this last week. Remind you about your rubrics. We're going to go over that and remind you again, this is where, again, you can find your week 2 lecture, week 3 coming up, 5 and 6, and then your recordings down here. Funny thing happened to me just before I came on today is that in another class that I teach, a student said to me that he put the wrong keyword in for the week 2 lecture, which I'm still trying to figure it out, because the week 2 lecture for his class doesn't take place till tomorrow night. So I don't know if he means week 1. Maybe he did. He said so. Anyway, that's one of the boggling things about this job. So anyway, so you know when your lectures are taking place, it's always there. And also, uh, oh, okay. All right. You got it now? So you got the app now. Good. All right. And then the live lecture, if you want to click on this link, of course, just, as I show students, things that they didn't know already, you could go to it. And then if you clicked on it, this is what you'll see. I'm just going to show you this real quick, and then I'm going to get out of it. You will see this. Anyway, it was just a preview. So the lecture for last week, boom, is easy to get with one click, and you have it right there. So that's one of the features that I like to do for my students. Okay, moving right along, let's look at what's happening this week. What is happening this week? We're going to deal with the First Amendment rights, our basic constitutional rights under the United States Constitution, and the FOIA, the good old Freedom of Information Act. I've had some personal uses for the Freedom of Information Act. I'll tell you about that a little bit when we come to it. And then there's an activity that we're going to deal with criminal justice and the First Amendment as well. And then I always remind you that your discussion post, media, and trial equality is involved with a required post tonight by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and Saturday 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then again, I encourage you, if you can reply to more than one post, that would be great. And then finally, be sure to complete the written assignment, federal versus state, Federal Information and Disclosure Acts. And basically that's the FOIA. It's not necessarily called that in your state, but there's almost every state has a state version of it. And then, of course, the course project, interviewee selection. I'm just going to talk about what you need to do concerning that. And then, of course, you know what adversity is the springboard to success is. Well, as I want to thank, by the way, a few of you have sent me some really nice remarks. I appreciate it. I got a little teary-eyed, but I'm happy that it encourages my students. One of my students actually went as far as to say, and I don't know if it was in this class or the other one, but I think it's in this one. No, and it had to be in the other class, because, oh, no, it was in this class. And the student said that um, they had some, no, that was correction in the other class, because they were just coming in, said that they were a little concerned about the challenges that they'll face, but then after listening to what I went through, they no longer feel like anything's a challenge. So I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. But that's what it's all about, is to encourage rather than discourage people. And then let's always, as our weekly visit with our course calendar. Um, so the initial post, of course, is due tonight. And then this is the live lecture. You can click on that. Your reading assignment, which I just kind of talked about. As you are all well aware, there's no textbook for this course. And then there's a reply post due Saturday the 18th. The 19th, your written assignment will be due, and that we'll talk about with the rubric. And then, of course, the course project. We're going to talk about that, so you can get off to a good start with that as well. And that's it. And then reminding you again that this course officially ends the 16th. Officially ends the 16th, which is, so you have 6 complete weeks in this particular course. But as you can see, that by today is the 14th, that by Thursday, which is the 16th, you'll have just 1 month. So it behooves you not to fall behind. Okay, let's get into our module 2. Let's dive right in here. And let's take a look at the assignments that you have to do for this week, so that I can always clarify assignments. Read the required Freedom of Information Act. You click on this, it will open it up, and it is rather lengthy, esoteric, but it was written by lawyers who have a tendency to be esoteric in their writings. I can talk about them really pretty badly. Yeah, because I'm one. so you want to get that. So, and research your state's Public Information Disclosure Act, as I said, in a 1 to 2 page paper. And it's APA style. We already been over all of that. Double space. Please don't give me single space unless you're quoting something. And again, make sure that if I always tell students, don't have lengthy quotes in your papers. I'd rather have, and this is what I had a few students do, and I remind them, that you can put a reference to something in your paper that's lengthy and then attach an appendix to it, uh, or addendum to it, in addition to the reference page, and that will suffice. And that's a very good thing. I have students that do that all the time. So, all right. And then in your paper include the following bits of information: an overview of your state's Public Information Disclosure Act, three differences between protection of individuals by the state as it compares to the FOIA, and identify um, a minimum of three differences between your State Disclosure Act and the Freedom of Information Act itself. Now, these don't necessarily have to be two different things, okay? But the key thing is that, and I grade students because the student brought it to my attention. They say, well, you require three differences in the protection, yes, but then a minimum of three differences noted between the state's Disclosure Act and the Freedom of Information Act. That doesn't mean you have to come up with six. Okay, just to clarify that the authors of this course, when they did that, um, they kind of realize it too, but they don't like to change courses until they get ready to redo them all together. So, and then the final bullet point is identify which differences are important to your privacy, uh, involved as well in the Freedom of Information Act. And of course, our friend, the rubric, should be your friend too, because that's how you get your grades, your due date, and then click on the rubric again, and you'll see the information that's required, which is standard in the quality, content, and accuracy section for most of your points, and then the rest of it is more mechanical, dealing with the grammar, and then it's the 1 to 2 page minimum length. When I say 1 page too, I don't mean half a page, 3/4 of a page. And as I said before, and I'll say it again, that the reason why we put minimum requirements on papers is because we believe that it takes at least that amount of information to be able to adequately address the issues that are required to reach the optimal in terms of your grade for the assignments that we issue out to you. It's not to try to, get you to do busy work. No. Format, and then you're going to follow the APA, all of this stuff. I'm not going to go over that but I do remind you about Wikipedia, but we already talked about that. Okay, so you guys should be pretty good with how the rubric operates there. Okay. And then your discussion, media and trial equality. And then, you're going to deal with this from the perspective that the jury listens to both sides, and then determine the truth based on the information they presented. In other words, they're the ones who are in charge when there's a jury trial. When I was a lawyer, my chosen method of representing defendants in criminal cases was 12 in the box. And that's what the jury is. And actually it's 14. And the reason why we say 14, anybody know why we say 14 and not just 12? Do you know why we say 14? Okay. Nope. Judge doesn't count. Judges are more like the referee, but nope, not the decider. Nope. The reason is this, is that the juries consist of 12 that are your jurors, and then what we call two alternate jurors. these are jurors that sit and they hear the whole case. And but if there's no reason for them to be used, in other words, they're there to be substitutes in case something happens to the jurors. And it happened in the O.J. Simpson case and a couple other cases where there were jurors that were disqualified during the course and they brought in other jurors. But the point of the matter is so that they don't have to, they'd have a mistrial if they didn't have the 12 that were required in those criminal cases. And so anyway, so all 14 hear the evidence. However, at the time when the jury deliberates, which is the time they come together to decide after hearing all of the evidence, that they will, reach a verdict or not reach a verdict, then there's only the 12 that are left that'll go in there. So that's why we say 12 in the box, but 14 a little extra. It's like the spare tires in a car. So keeping this in mind, um, you have to also be aware of the fact there's media coverage. And one of the things that you're going to learn when you do research here with media and the trial equality is that there are several tools that the judge will use. One of the tools is what we call a gag order. And with a gag order, it's where the judge says to the defendants or lawyers or all parties involved that they can't discuss with the media um, the case during the course of the trial itself. And the reason for that is to protect the ability of the individual to get a fair and impartial trial. Then the other thing that is used is sequestering. Anybody know what sequestering a jury is? Ever heard of the term? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Held in isolation. And what that means is that they don't allow you to, um, read. By the way, everything you read, things you look at, even your visitors are all carefully screened. Uh, and that the idea is to keep you from getting what the media is saying and be persuaded in your opinions or decisions once you reach the decision, reach the stage rather you deliberate so that the individual gets a fair trial. Let me see. That was quick. Let me get that there. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't eliminate it, but yeah, it does reduce it, um, and it makes sense. It makes sense. That's why when people get picked in high profile cases, like the O.J. Simpson case, like Casey Anthony, um, and also other cases that you may have come into contact with, they lock the jurors up because you think the stuff that you see when the court takes place, and then the news media comes out with newspaper articles, even there are books out there, and then there are um, uh, stories that come in on the news reporting of the case itself. They don't want the jurors to be tampered with in terms of that. So anyway, so the question is it fair that the media can publicize information about the accused prior to a fair trial? Now, that issue is not necessarily what I just got through talking about. The issue that they're asking about also, which has to do with the reasons why you can see why what I'm about to say is going to take place, is that the question is this. Okay, here's the example. Let me just use the example of one that we all know about. Okay, those four police officers who are going to be tried by probably, I don't know, a jury. By the way, do you know who determines whether or not there's a jury trial or a bench trial? You know who determines that? Okay, you say the DA, and actually it's not. And even though the prosecution has the burden of proof, however, the defendant has a right to a fair and impartial trial. You know, in the Constitution, where it talks about the rights uh, to a jury trial as one of the constitutional rights, that's given to the defendant to give them an opportunity to have a fair trial. In other words, it allows them to have, rather than one person who would be the judge, to decide the evidence and so forth, not the evidence, but anyway, to determine their fate. That gives 12 a chance. And it gives us a chance to also put people on the jury, or to get people on the jury who are not lawyers or been exposed to the criminal justice system as much. I give you an example here, and this is all good stuff for you to know um, about. My daughter, my oldest daughter, to be exact, she was selected on a jury. Now, it was amazing in a criminal case. Now, when you come to the point of selecting jurors, they have what they call voir dire, where the jurors are asked questions and they determine who the persons are going to be that end up on the jury. Well, she ended up getting selected. And it was amazing because they asked her from her jury form about anybody in her family been the victims of a criminal act, and have you been the victim of a criminal act, and blase and so forth. And then they ask their education and all that stuff. The one thing they can't ask is your religion, and of course they can't ask you about your political positions. But the point of the matter is that they asked her all those questions, and with her dad being a criminal defense lawyer, uh, at that time I was practicing, and she got, and then with her grandmother and grandfather, who was my father and mother, being the victims of violence in the family, and then she also had on my first wife's family at the side, her brother had been killed by gun violence, and so all this stuff had to be disclosed. Yet they still put her on the jury, and the jury of 12, they ended up selecting her as the foreperson, which was amazing to me. And then also, um, the jury got hung. Um, when you get a hung jury, that means you don't have unanimous verdict. You know that you can only be found guilty in a criminal case by unanimous vote. And if there is anybody other than the all 12 don't agree, then in that case, then they come with a hung jury and a mistrial. And then when a mistrial, defendant can either be let go, or then the prosecution then can come back and retry the person again, and the process starts all over again. But it was very interesting that she ended up on there. Side note is that the young man was tried a second time by another jury, and he was acquitted. So she said, "See, I was right." I says, "I know, I taught you like that." So anyway, so that's why we started to look at in terms of how the jury operates. So this is something that can help you in terms of your research as well. So now let's talk about the course project. So this week is a very easy, short project, short assignment, and all you have to do this week is, you don't have to write your questions out. And this, you already know when we talked about it last week, that you're going to select two separate professionals. One is what we call a PIO, or a public information officer, and that's the person who might speak on behalf of the agency. And as they point out here, such as the police department, the sheriff's department, or they have a designated media person to communicate for them. They're not necessarily news reporters, but they're the person who speaks on their behalf. And a lot of times you should be aware that You will find there are individuals who formerly were newspaper reporters or TV or radio reporters that actually are the ones who become the spokespersons. And the reason why is because those individuals are able to make statements to and not contaminate the case itself. So anyway, all right. Oh, I just looked at my note here. The key thing that I was talking about when it comes to jurors, going back to that for just a second, is that there's hardly going to be, it's going to be hard to find people who don't know about um, what happened with the Floyd case. And the video is over and over and over. Almost everybody knows about it, and so forth and so on. And so the point somebody says, how can they get a fair trial? Well, the bottom line is that because there are a whole lot of factors that lawyers can put together in terms of defense, but usually one of the first things they'll try to see, and they've already tried to do it, um, is to possibly consider moving the case out of Hennepin County where the incident happened and then to another county in Minnesota. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason for that is because then they feel that the individuals can get a fair trial. The primary exhibit, which nobody has to be shown, is the one that you saw with the officer with the knee on George Floyd's neck. So anyway, so that's a whole issue about back to the fair trial and the media. So anyway, so with your interviews, well, we first of all require that you find the newspaper reporter, and that newspaper reporter is from a local news station. I'm not saying you can't find a national one now in this day and time because they do report on local news, but local newspaper people and news people are really good because they're in the community itself and live in the community itself. So your assignment is to provide me with a news reporter, and it tells you how you can do this. Now, as I said last week, because of the pandemic, um, sometimes people can get the people face to face, and then other times you have to do it by phone or Skype or Zoom. There's so many other methods that people can do it. And then sometimes I had one student once who actually worked was married to a newspaper reporter. So there they had it right there. So you can talk on phone with someone, um, but the bottom line and the key thing is to try to get them in the area um, of where you are. Now, if you're in a rural area, go to the nearest major city in terms of reaching out. Uh, like there's some people in Wisconsin that would deal with Milwaukee or either Madison or some of the other cities. Of course, in Minnesota, you got, as I said, Minneapolis, you got St. Paul, the Twin Cities, and then you got other towns outside of there. So anyway, the key thing is you want to find that person. So this is a description of it. The PIO, I already kind of described it, is usually found from the agency, and you could email that person and ask the person questions, or you can call, um, and then that person will be able to help you. The point of the matter is that, as I said earlier, this person is the person who is responsible for releasing information, and they can tell you how they work in terms of working with the media. And as I already said, usually the PIO is very familiar with the media because as you heard you're saying, it takes one to know one, because most of them were individuals who worked in the area. If you're having trouble making contact with a newspaper person, you can do the search on the crime scene blog, where you can dialogue with others on the specific topics. But be careful out there when you get into that zone, because there's a lot of biasness involved in there in some of those blogs. Okay. So remember to write down the name, the phone number, email address, what agency, newspaper, and so forth, or and then dates that you may discuss in terms of a possible interview. And you can do it in one time, because you'll see what the next assignment comes up. So this week, what you're going to submit are the 3 bullet points. Select your newspaper reporter with the following information that I just also gave you: the name, company, address, phone number, and email address. You can also include, if you want, the website, public information officer, the name, agency, phone number, and email address as well. A one-page summary of the interviews that you'll conduct, as well as a plan. Set a plan out for your interviews, including how the interview will be conducted. If it's going to be by phone or person, don't worry about it. If you change it, if you start out with in person, then you have to do it by phone, don't worry about it. Just when the time comes that you end up having to do that, just include that in your assignments that you submit at a later time. You don't have to send me a message or anything like that. And then try to get the dates of the interview, subject to change at all times. I have no problems with that, but at least the purpose for what I'm trying to get you to do is to lay out a plan. Okay. Any questions about the assignment for this week can be resolved by what I'm talking about and or looking at the rubric. And it tells you how your points are divided. For 115 points, you get 40 points for providing this information, 40 points for providing this information, and then contains 1-page outline, then you'll get 30 points. Okay, with this information. So that's 115, and then your standard organizational stuff that you have there. Any questions?
Quick question.
Go ahead.
I like to kind of keep things organized. Is it okay if we have all of like this information and we use bullet points and stuff like that to have everything organized? Is that all right?
Okay, I'm trying to understand what you're asking me.
So how you want us to have like
How
the
you
newspaper name, like all of that, like the agency email, name, address, and all of that. Is it okay if we keep it like, their name and then their bullet point with their phone number and stuff like that? That way it's organized and it's neat.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because remember, the purpose of it is to provide the information. So yeah, bullet point, for example, to satisfy this 40 points, the name, company, address, so forth. Yeah, absolutely. And then the same thing for the second as well. But next though, you're going to outline of the interview plan in addition to that information. You got it? If you notice one thing that's missing from here. Now, by the way, I should fix this. I'm going to fix it at some point. Don't worry about the 2-page minimum length requirement. I'll say that now. Okay? If you could do it in a page, which it depends on how well you organize. But the key thing is that I want to make sure that you have all of the information covered in here. And I won't be dogmatic about that. Anyway, it's a 5-point loss anyway. So does that help you any? Oh, okay. All right. Anything else? All right. So the key thing is I want you to get going with what you have to do. Okay. All right. So that's it for the assignments for this week. All right. So now let's, for the next 16 minutes or so, talk about the content of this week. Lesson content. Okay, so I'm basically going to talk about criminal justice and the First Amendment, and remind you, you're dealing with the Freedom of Information Act and how it operates. So let's start out by talking about, what are we talking about? Everybody basically knows, almost everybody I know, they know the First Amendment, not by heart, but they know that you can say things, and that you have a freedom of religion, and that the press, which goes to the issue of why there's some students that I've had in terms of exercises. Should we deny the press the ability to be able to report on criminal cases? And the answer is no, we should not, because the First Amendment says that they have that constitutional right. And so as a result of that, we want them to be able to do so. But we do hope that they will be responsible in terms of their reporting, which goes back to some of the rules I talked about earlier, like the gag order and the reason for sequestering the individuals there. But the press there's two sides to it. Number one, the press has a responsibility to report what's happening in the neighborhood, in the community where people reside, so people know what's happening around them. And the other reason is important, and that is to be able to recognize and understand that the press has a responsibility to make sure that actually investigations or cases are correct. In other words, individuals are not being deprived of their constitutional rights, like the Fourth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, particularly the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, excessive force, or those kind of things in terms of us dealing with it. So the key thing is that the press has a duty to report the news to the community for those reasons. Okay, so we have a right to express ourselves constitutionally. There is something that people don't agree with in terms of people demonstrating. There's the old uh, Tinker case. I can't remember the full name of it, but if you um, Google Tinker, um, and I don't have my phone in front of me, I could pull it up here, but pull that up, Tinker versus, and I forget which state it is, and it talks about the famous armband case, where people can wear uh, things of expression to demonstrate how they feel. And now, for example, it's not uncommon for people to wear patches. Even athletes wear them on their uniforms. Police officers wear a little thing over their badge for individuals who work there. Well, this is a form of expression, and so uh, no law should prohibit the media from reporting the news. And it says here that we have to balance that right, and we have to consider very seriously how the media reports the news. And one of the key things is investigative reporting is really key. I've had a number of friends who are investigative reporters. The factual information. Unfortunately, what happens, as you know, the media wants to be the first ones to get the story out there a lot of times, and they find themselves in a quote rush to judgment situation. Now, what I don't like is this, is that when the media gets something wrong and there's a whole big story about it, and then there is a, for example, in newspapers, it's really famous for this. On the early part of the newspaper, you have all the news about a certain incident and so forth. And then you've heard of newspaper retractions, right? You've heard of newspaper retractions? Yeah. And so what happens with the newspaper retraction is that it gets hidden in the obituary section or somewhere where somebody might not even read about it. But now we're in a society now where not many people read newspapers. They will do internet stuff and paper news. The days of, you know, dad and mom sitting down reading the newspaper and pulling it out, it's there, but it's not like it was before because of the various media that we have now for reporting that type of information. So the key thing is that what the newspaper and the media responsibility is to provide information of knowledge to the people in the community, but also not to taint them. And that's the point. So when you click on this link, you'll see what I'm talking about. And then this is an older article. This is an older article. However, it's still pretty close to what we're dealing with today. All right. So the key thing is that there are rights. So now what has happened is that the United States Federal Freedom of Information Act came out when I was 16 years old, FOIA, as we call it. And what it did, it allows the media and individuals, by the way, to obtain information and reports. But the reports that the media gets, for example, is like, for example, I did Jesse Smollett was a young man who was um, was charged. The case dismissed. Now they're going to charge him again about lying to the police about him being the victim of a not a racial. Well, it was supposed to be racial, but anyway, it's supposed to be an attack on him. You guys familiar with the Jesse Smollett's case? It was all over the country that they wrote about it. Okay, Jesse Smollett was a character who was on Empire, which I never watched. But anyway, he lied to the police and said that he was attacked by some people, and he said that they were wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great Again hats. Turns out to be there two Africans, and then there was some question about whether or not he filed a phony police report saying that he was the victim of being attacked and that he conjured up the same whole thing to try to gain some points with the people on Empire, and it backfired in his face. So what I'm getting ready to tell you is based upon the Freedom of Information Act, some of my friends in the media were able to get the police reports in this case, which was public, but what they did was they redacted like the address and the names of some of the parties involved. And so uh, the reports, as they say, are generally completed within 24 hours after the incident. Some is redacted to protect identity. That's what I was talking about. So I actually did a special Facebook Live piece where I talked about that particular case, and I produced the document itself, extensive report. Anyway, so the reports are given, and so at the trial stage, as we began to think about and we talked about a few minutes ago, that more media attention is involved with it. And it's because of the Freedom of Information Act, which permits the media to have access to reports and other things. And so there's information about uh, the individual who's charged with the crime, and sometimes irresponsible media misrepresent it. And so the Freedom of Information Act, if you ever studied the history of it, and you should, and particularly for this week's assignment, understand what it's all about. And that is, number one, the purpose it is to allow the public and the media to have access to information. And each state has their own version of the federal, which you're going to discover. And there we help you out. We got a little spreadsheet in here that if you click on it, it actually opens it up. I'll show you what it looks like. It's an Excel, and I'm opening it up for you. And it gives you information on each state, and it goes down. For example, okay, like Minnesota, it tells you things that you learn about the Freedom of Information Act there. So the key thing is that that information is readily available, so that you understand how each of the states are operating there. Okay, let me see if I can get out of this without closing out the whole thing. There we go. So you can see that for each of your jurisdictions. And then, as it says here, it asks the question, what happens when the states enacted laws to keep the information private? It says it creates a discrepancy between state and the government. The states have the right to determine what is acceptable in their own state. And the question is, does the public have a right to know, and so forth and so on? We've already kind of discussed that. And people would want the public to know that they were victims of they would not want the public to know that they are victims of crime, or even know if they were suspects. But our criminal justice system says that a person is innocent until proven guilty. But this dilemma plays out in dealing with the Freedom of Information Act. Okay. And then it starts asking the question about high profile cases and so forth, as I proposed a few minutes ago, what's going to happen in those police officers being tried. Okay. Now, I want to tell you about what happened with me with the Freedom of Information Act. When I graduated from high school, well, no, this is long after. Actually, it was when I was graduating from law school, and I was in 1978, and there was a lot of news reporting about there were parties in what an investigation called COINTELPRO. And COINTELPRO was an investigation that was conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to include what they call radicals, or individuals that were considered as subversive. Going back to the old McCarthy era, if you ever go back in history and study when there was a senator by the name of McCarthy, not the one that was from Minnesota, but McCarthy. This goes way back, and I'm trying to remember, it was the 50s. But anyway, he declared anybody that was coming up against the status quo. And one of the people whose names were in there was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that said he was a communist because he was dealing with the civil rights issue, and that the rights were already set out with Jim Crow, that African Americans and whites should not be in the same classroom and all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, anybody who was, quote, a subversive or a person who expressed a position different were put into this investigation. Now, this was one among many. Well, I was involved in what was called the Black American Law Student Association while I was in law school, and I was one of the leaders involved in that national organization. And I found out through a FOI, Freedom of Information Act request, that I was investigated because of that. And so I was able to actually get information from my own personal files, following the process of the federal government, not the state process, but the federal process. And I found out there was so much, there were pictures, there were places I didn't even know I wasn't even, who was I, I was trying to get through school. But the bottom line is that there were so many Americans, I'm just telling you, that will quote what we call ordinary people like I was, that it was something. And so the Freedom of Information Act, I filed the proper paperwork, and I got so much stuff that I was amazed at. So anyway, that was my experience with the Freedom of Information Act. You might find that same kind of thing taking place now with some of the individuals who might go against dealing with the issue of being labeled as communists or socialists, or people like Angela Davis, Rosa Parks they had a file on her. They had files on even some of by the way, they even had files on some of the senators and legislators and a few judges as well. So anyway, that is something that I wanted to share with you about the FOIA. It's 9:30, so I'm about to wipe it out here. First Amendment, you click on that and you'll see information about it. The FOIA gives you some information that I've kind of already covered and helps you find some details. And then the Watergate scandal, which was a very interesting one that came out in the 70s. And the Watergate was something that that caused President Nixon to resign. Okay, so all right, so that's it for me. You're gonna take a look at that, and so the key phrase. Have any ideas of what the key phrase might be? Because I'm done. Unless you have questions. Any idea of what the key phrase? That's close. That's the overall topic. One more shot at it, and then I'll tell you. Yay! All right. That's it. FOIA. You can either give me FOIA or what it stands for, Freedom of Information Act. That's it. Very good. That's it. And the reason why I wanted to use that is because I want you to begin to think in terms of what your assignment is, and I want you to be able to recognize that this is a law that came about because of the First Amendment rights that we have as individuals. Very good. Very good. Any questions about anything that I covered tonight? Or are you good? Okay, well, you guys have a good week. I'm getting ready to go and relax this shoulder in a minute. So I'll see you guys next week at the same time with week 3, which will be the halfway point. So thank you so much. And so with that, I'm going to say good night. See you next week. Have a great week.